Kompany with a K are specialists in global business verification. They provide advanced solutions to financial institutions and corporations on identity verification. Now, imagine putting this service on the blockchain. Well, that's a reality for my guest, CTO and founder of Kompany, Peter Bainbridge-Clayton.
It's a pleasure to be here.
You're listening to CoinGeek Conversations with Natalie Mason.
Before we get into what Kompany does, I read that you taught yourself to code at the age of 11.
Good grief. Where did you find that from?
Fascinated by this. I've done a little bit of research, very, very impressive CV dating back to that age almost. So I'd love to hear a bit about your background.
Dating back to the beginning of time. No, you're right. That was 1981 when I was 11, so it was my first year of secondary school. And they had a Commodore PET computer, and very few people will have heard of these things, but you'll actually recognize the picture. Everyone knows what they look like, but no one knows what they are.
What is it?
So it was literally like an office computer, and it had a keyboard built in and this sort of box, and then it had this kind of triangular screen thing. It was made by Commodore, who were very big in the 80s in computers. And it was a phenomenal piece of kit. I mean, total rubbish compared to today, obviously. But at the time, it was very, very impressive, and it cost an absolute fortune. And our school was almost unique in having a computer for a start. And having one of these was quite impressive. And there was one for the entire school. And no one used it. And I just took to it and then went to the local library. I got a book. And I keep meaning to actually buy this book again if I can find it. It was called Fred Learns About Computers. And it was this, it was like a kid's book almost, but it was this character called Fred, and it basically took you through the basics of programming. And that's how I learned to program in Commodore Basic at the time. And from then I've come slightly further, I would like to say.
I love that. No, absolutely. Back to Kompany, because of course that's the company at hand. Tell us about what you do.
So I'm always really bad at explaining this. Kompany is basically, we set it up to provide business information to people that require it. And that sounds kind of vague, and it is kind of vague to be honest. What we do is, so our customers are people like banks, large industrials, people in regulated and people in unregulated but high money throughput places. So people that are legally required to do certain checks at certain times. Now, those checks require certain bits of information, certain documents. So what we did, and my co-founder and I, we worked together off and on for many years. And he just finished doing bwin, which is a gambling site. And then a 123 people was a person lookup site. And he had the problem where people were coming to him to try and advertise on the site, the gambling site. And he had the duty of checking who these people were, because it's a great way to money launder. But he couldn't do it. And they were coming from all over the place, and he couldn't actually check who the people wanting to advertise on his site were. So maybe he was missing out on revenue, maybe he was doing some good. Don't know, because you can't tell. And at the same time he was doing that, I was working in UK Company's house. And then we met up again, actually at a telco in South Africa. I travel a lot. And we got talking again, and said, oh, well, why don't we do this? What people really need for this sort of thing is a place where they can go to one source, and regardless of where the client they're investigating, whether it's the UK or the US or Austria or South Africa or wherever it is, should be able to get all the information they need and all the documents from one place. I said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. We got some very good South African red wine and started to plot out what Kompany would do. And somewhere in the office, there's a tennis ball. And drawn on this tennis ball is our first vision of how the site would end up looking.
Love that. So what year are we talking?
So this was, so we're 8 years old in 2012. It must have been 2011, because we founded in 2012.
And how far is the picture of what Kompany is now to the image on the tennis ball?
It's not bad. We've actually just finished on a product, or we're still working on it, but it's more or less ready to go, called UBO Discovery, which is where we can walk the shareholder tree of a company to find out actually who is at the end of this, who's pulling the strings, who really owns this company, which is quite difficult because a lot of these companies go across jurisdictions, and a lot of them are deliberately hidden. And so that sort of spider diagram, as I call it, was what we drew on the tennis ball. And now we're actually delivering that very thing. So it's kind of fun.
So when you're talking about verifications, what levels and types of verifications are you doing and offering for banks and your clients, and on what scale?
So if you imagine, if you're running a business and you go to a bank, and say, I want to open an account, or I want to have a loan, or I need a loan to make 200 million widgets for something. The first thing they're going to have to do is check out, A, are you real? Are you who you say you are? Is your business real? Is it where you say it is? Does it have the history that you claim? It could be a new company. And all this is relatively simple as long as you stick to one jurisdiction. Now, in the UK, we are very spoiled because it's actually ridiculously easy to do those checks. Although the counterpoint to that, and this is actually being addressed by Kompany's House at the moment, is that although the provenance of the data is fine because it comes from Kompany's House, the actual quality of the data isn't, because it's known that the data quality is not great for Kompany's House if people deliberately try to make it not great. So if they're trying to obfuscate something, it's relatively simple to do.
And when you were working for Kompany's House, did you have a role in this, in implementing this system?
I designed it.
You designed the system for them?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I was the architect for the entire Kompany's House core system. So if you send a document to Kompany's House, in the good old days, you send a piece of paper. You don't anymore, you do it online. All the processing of that and the feeding into it is still my design. So yeah, quite a big job. It was a 6 months contract that lasted 6 years.
So one thing that I've read, it's an acronym, is it KYBs?
KYB, yeah.
KYBs. So KYBs, what are they and how do they play into what you're doing here with verifications?
So KYB is a sort of mangling of KYC, which is what people are normally used to. The KYC is know your customer. And the regulations are written around this basis of knowing your customer, knowing with whom you are dealing. Because we specifically do business verification, and sort of by extension, people associated with business, so managing directors, shareholders, that sort of thing. But essentially at the core is a business. We refer to it as KYB, just to keep this distinction going. That KYB check would involve getting the incorporation documents, getting a register extract, for example, getting the latest set of accounts, so that they can make their internal processes and the legal requirements that they have to meet to comply with the regulators and the Financial Conduct Authority, they can fulfill that. So what we do is basically give them a single place that they can come, and regardless of jurisdiction, more or less, we cover 200 plus jurisdictions, they can get the information that they need in real time.
So where are you storing this then, traditionally?
The way we actually do it is we keep a cache of our data, but that's so we can do lookups and give the customer sort of the option of getting fresh data if they want. Predominantly, though, we act as a network. So we act as a sort of a pipe to connect the customer to the register. It's all very traditional at the moment. We don't store the documents, or rather, we hold them for our customers, and they can get them anytime. But we don't give that document to anyone else. So whoever's paid for it, and there's copyright issues there anyhow, but whoever has paid for it, it's theirs. And if someone comes along and orders the same one, half an hour later, they'll actually get a fresh new copy for it.
I see. And of course, we're here today at the CoinGeek conference. Our main business is blockchain.
Yes.
So what is the connection here?
So the way we view blockchain, in terms of what we do is it's one of proof, which of course blockchains are very, very good on proof. They do certain things extremely well, and proof is one of them. So if you imagine a scenario where, say, I'm a bank or a crypto exchange even, and I say, yeah, I've done my checks on this company. I use Kompany. They sent us this information back, and I did the check on this date. That's all fine. And you're the regulator, and you come to me and say, okay, that's good. You appear to have met the requirements under the law. Prove it. And you know what? I can't. I can give you log files, and I could ask Kompany to give you log files, and I can give you a document with a date and time on it. That's not proof. That's trust. That's you trusting me that I'm not lying. And if I'm deliberately trying to hoodwink you, of course I'm going to lie.
Yeah.
So I can't actually prove that I did that, and you can't prove that I didn't. You just have to accept that I did and look for other patterns. So we usually bundle KYC, KYB with AML, anti-money laundering. The regulator doesn't actually care that much about that because that's the fraud squad's job. What they care about is applying the laws which say you must do this check. So it's a bizarre situation where as long as you've checked this guy who turns out to be money laundering, actually you've met that part of the legislation. And that's okay, because there's other legislation, obviously, to deal with other things. So what we're doing with the blockchain is basically, at its most basic level, the stage one, as I call it, we are recording the fact that you asked us, sorry, you're the regulator, aren't you? I'm the bank. I asked Kompany to do this check on this company at this point in time. And the response was this, whatever this is. So that could be a document or data or both. Now, by sticking all that law onto a chain of some description, which is considered to be immutable, with some kind of time-stamping mechanism, that then becomes legal proof. And it's legally true that at least that part of the whole process took place. I view this like a sort of an onion skin. I like to think of the thing where we're turning layers of trust into layers of truth.
That's nice. That's really nice.
Yeah.
Can you take me back through your journey to finding BSV?
Sure.
And maybe some of the pitfalls and things that happened when you tried on other chains, I guess.
Yeah. So where we're taking this is to actually have a fully on-chain request response system, so that even the requests which normally would come to our API are done through smart contracts on chain. And that's another layer on this onion skin. And then what we've actually built is a kind of marketplace for this information. So that information, it becomes tokenized and can be traded.
Great.
But back to your original question, we started off with Ethereum. And the reason we started with Ethereum was because it's got a lot of problems, but one thing it does have is a really good smart contract setup. We wanted to be sure that we could use smart contracts because we want the actual request to go through smart contracts. We're then talking about having oracles watching it and all manner of things, which makes things rather more complex. And we had the skills in-house, so we just said, okay, we'll just bang one together on Ethereum and see what happens. And it worked a treat. The big problem was the speed of Ethereum. Not worrying about the cost, because it was just a POC, but the cost of gas, yeah. Of course, if someone's using our API to get one data set for 1 euro cent, they're not going to want to spend 50 euro cents in Ethereum gas just to register that fact. They're going to take the risk. So cost is a sort of an issue there. But we did that, but because Ethereum is so slow, what we had to do was we had this sort of 2-minute mechanism where all the requests would get bundled up together in a Merkle tree that's built up over 2 minutes, and then we'd throw the entire Merkle tree as a block onto Ethereum. And it was only after those 2 minutes that we could send the proof back to the customer. Now, of course, the customer is not interested at this point. If they can't make the API call and get the proof back in the same time,
instantly,
they've gone away. They will never, ever in a million years call back to us to actually say, that request we did then, can you give us the proof for it? It's just not going to happen. So adoption would be zero. So that drove us towards the faster chains. We also did some work with Hyperledger on Oracle, and that was good. It's nice and quick. It's nice and fast. It's got a good payload capability. But Hyperledger, of course, is a private chain, which, interestingly, some people would think is better because if you come from a sort of a dinosaur financials, let's be nice, world, then it sounds much better. It sounds safer. It sounds, it's much more protected. No one can see my stuff. But of course, it's not. If you don't have enough nodes to do the consensus mechanism properly, it's not safe at all. It's quite the opposite. It's actually giving you the illusion of safety because the people who make the decisions don't understand the technology. They're just reading that blockchain is perfectly safe and immutable. They believe it, and it's just not true.
The buzzwords.
In those circumstances.
Yeah.
Exactly. And obviously, I'm not saying that the tech staff are going to be hoodwinking them, but they could quite easily. So we have a co-investor with nChain, so we got chatting to nChain. And they actually told me quite a few things about BSV that I didn't know. Although we'd heard of BSV, we hadn't looked into it as a mechanism. And then our investor said, look, you really want to be looking into BSV because it does all these things. And so we said, yeah, okay, we'll have a look. And once we had a look and we spoke to nChain, it's like, oh, yeah, this is good. This is actually the thing that we want because it's got the payload, it's got the speed, consensus, the range, it's got the cost. And interestingly, it's got the timestamping stuff built in, which is what Jimmy and Craig have been talking about a lot. So actually, it ticks all the boxes for us, which is why we're definitely going with it now. It should be fun. And of course, it's got a native token, which means that when we go to the full marketplace, sort of reselling this tokenized information, everything's already in place to do that. There's no creating a token just to do this one thing, which then people have to buy and transfer and that sort of thing.
That's super exciting. So now I'm almost, if you don't mind my saying so, seeing you as a bridge almost then between this world of Bitcoin and those traditional systems that perhaps look at this and don't necessarily understand it.
Yeah.
So how do you go about navigating and getting them to trust what this technology can do?
Yeah, I agree, and that's how we want to position ourselves as infrastructure. Really, we have an infrastructure which is our network, and we want to expand that infrastructure into the blockchain use case. Sorry, I'm stumbling. Now, of course, some of the banks are already doing blockchain things. Every single one of them has some kind of blockchain initiative. There's R3, Corda, blah 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 blah. But this is just really the truth is that this is some guys in a room somewhere doing something that all that's happening is the board is sending them money for. And the reason for that is they're just not really sure how to handle it and what to do with it and what it means in terms of their normal business if they actually go too far down this road. Now, the way we see ourselves is we are providing them with a service which they need to have. They are legally obliged to have it. They don't need to use us, they could use anyone. But because they're legally obliged to have it, we can give them actually a system which exceeds the legal requirements, the current and known, it actually totally exceeds them. And they can then be using blockchain, so they get all the kudos from it without actually any of the problem of having to know anything about it. It could be very, very important. Yeah.
Well, it sounds revolutionary, really.
It would be revolutionary to some, for sure. Yeah. Evolutionary to others, perhaps. A lot of people won't understand it, but when they actually see what it's doing, particularly for them, and that's a key thing, and I'll sort of reiterate this, sorry to repeat myself, this is a business requirement for them. They have no choice. They have to do something like this at all. And they cannot use someone like a CRA. I shan't name names, that would be very bad mannered of me. Because they simply do not provide information which meets the criteria. They're getting away with it at the moment, but they just do not meet it.
So in that sense, is it just a matter of time before everyone is almost using a system like BSV, or how do you see it playing out?
I think, yes. I think it will be a matter of time. Purely because this is a valid use case for blockchain. And it's a very well-fitting use case, in particular for BSV. I see so much speculative, let's say, uses for blockchains. And I describe myself on my LinkedIn, I think, as a blockchain realist. And by that, what I mean is most of the people who have great blockchain ideas are talking about making a slow database. A slow, difficult-to-use, cumbersome database when you can just use a database. It reminds me, my dad told me this terrible joke. My dad's an electrician. He told me a terrible joke years ago. He said, pass me the electrician's screwdriver. And I was like 7 or something, I don't know. So I handed him a screwdriver. I said, no, the electrician's screwdriver. He was talking about a hammer.
Oh, right.
Of course, the point he was making was you can use practically any tool to do any job, but it doesn't mean it's the right tool for that job. And I see this with blockchain so often. I just see people, I will put it on blockchain. Why are you putting it on blockchain? Because then, and that's it. Because then, literally you're saying, because then it's using blockchain. And that's no argument.
Mm. But so this is different, of course, because as you just explained, this has to be done this way. Is that right?
Well, this is different because it's my idea, obviously. But no, when you look at the legal intricacies of it, this is simply the best way of doing it. And it's the only way which guarantees that it can't be gamed. And that's a win for everyone, especially the customers, because the last thing they want to do is get fined for not doing these checks and not being able to prove they're doing these checks. Again, the regulations don't say you have to do these checks. They actually say you have to prove that you've done these checks. What we're offering is a very simple, bulletproof way of proving that you did these checks. And we think that's a pretty big deal.
Wow. It really is. So what are we talking about time scale then here before actually seeing this implemented?
The magic question. So phase 1, which is the recording of the interaction, so we already have that on Ethereum, and we ported it to Hyperledger. So we're actually talking about porting it now to BSV, and we expect that to be done very quickly. We are talking with a partner in this space. We expect to have the layer 1 ported by the end of the year. It should be before that, but every time I say that, my planning manager will just shrivels and dies. So I try not to offer things too often that I can't deliver. So barring the monsoon, it should be by the end of the year, and then the second stage would be to put the smart contracts in place, which is going to be a little trickier. Because although the BSV support for smart contracts is there, it's not on a par with Ethereum, and that's just a fact.
But see, this is something that's good to be honest about and that people are aware of and that then will be improved upon.
Absolutely. And there are some outfits who are doing, who actually are offering Ethereum-like, or it may even be the full Ethereum model, which is great, and that's fantastic. So we don't think it's going to be a problem at all. In fact, we think we'll be spoilt for choice in terms of which engine to use there. But ideally, by that point, we'll have proven everything, and then it should be a case of literally just get some real eggheads in there and allow them build on what we already have.
It sounds like you have a serious client base already established. So is the first port of call then to try and get them on board?
Yes. So we have big banks already and large industrials. And the idea will be to use one of those or more than one of those as a test customer. I know it's a guinea pig, but that's not what I mean at all. So a sort of a friendly test customer. But we also see that there's no reason why other customers who perhaps don't have as much of a need for our core product, which is essentially the cross-border checks, they may just have, they may operate just within one country, one jurisdiction, or, limited countries, say Germany, Austria, Switzerland, DACH region. We're hoping as well that some of these people who don't require our full services might actually tip the scales in our favor to say, actually, okay, well, if I have that as well, then it's worth coming to you guys anyhow. And there isn't a single financial institution or large industrial, and I say this with absolute certainty, there isn't a single one of them in the world which doesn't desperately need to update its IT and automate a lot of these processes. There isn't one, and I've spoken to almost all of them, and they all tell me the same thing. We have to do it, we don't know how to do it. So, we know how to do it.
Well, how exciting is that for you then?
It's good.
That many clients who are definitely coming your way.
I hope so. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Peter. And
my pleasure.
Before we fully wrap, I just wanted to check if there's anything that you think I've missed that maybe is important for people to know.
That's a good question. What we would love to see is, and this is my onion thing again, so I'm sort of, if you can visualize this. If you imagine the company itself, not company, but a company, a business in the middle, they're giving information either to the register directly, as in the UK, or to an intermediary like an accountant, which is essentially the same thing, or in like Austria or Germany to a notary who will then do certain checks and then they give it to the register. But essentially you have the business, some kind of intermediary, potentially the register. Then you have people like us who are service providers getting information from the register. And then you have our clients outside of that. And then outside of that, you have the regulator. Now, because particularly using BSV, we can turn all those, which are all trust layers. The register is trusting whoever gives them the information. Whether it's trustworthy or not is largely irrelevant, but that's trust. We're trusting that the register gives us the information they've got. Again, there's no reason to not trust them, but it's still a trust level. We can't guarantee you that what they're giving us is exactly what they have. Our customers trust us, and the regulator trusts our customers. Now, when we have BSV in play, we've already taken the us to the customer to the regulator. That's all now become truth, not trust. What we'd love to see is people like Kompany's House or the registers throughout the world become part of this whole infrastructure as well. So they can say, actually, you know what? No, we can prove that we received this document with this content from that person, be that person the company or a notary. And then there you go, see, notaries can also do this. I got this from the company, I sent it to Kompany's House stored it, Kompany's House gave it to us. And then the whole chain becomes one of provable absolute fact. And these court cases, these checks, these reviews by regulators, they just vanish because everything is there in bits and bytes, in crazy long hex strings, but it's all there. And if you understand it, you can use it.
Yes, and I think you've explained it brilliantly there, because that is almost blockchain in a nutshell in an onion.
Yes, an onion shell.
An onion shell. Thank you so much, Peter. That was really fascinating. I'm really excited to watch your presentation.
It's going to be exactly what I just said, so you've had a good preview.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much to Peter Bainbridge-Clayton. Chime in next week. Charles will be back with you for another great conversation. That's it from me. Bye-bye.
The biggest sickness in healthcare isn't a disease. It's not a bacteria or a virus. It's the silence. See, the data we need to combat diseases, to stop suffering, it's not waiting to be uncovered. It's stuck behind closed doors in stubborn silos. The healthcare industry has the data to improve our lives in untold ways, but no one communicates. And in that silence, countless lives are lost. That's why at EHR Data, we're building the largest ever shared data set of human health. And it won't belong to a hospital, government, a corporation. It will belong to the rightful owner of your healthcare data, you. We're merging healthcare records with blockchain to finally put you in control. Because your data doesn't belong on private servers. It should be in your hands in service to your health. The greatest sickness may be silence, but the silence stops when you have a voice. EHR Data. Own your health.